On my birthday, my daughter gave me a brochure for a nursing home. It's time to think ahead, she smiled. I did, so I left her the garage, not the house. What she got in the will wasn't what she expected. It hit me in the cheek, not hard, but sharp enough to startle. A glossy brochure, still warm from her hands, slid down my face and landed squarely in my birthday cake. The frosting smeared across its cover, obscuring the words Maple Oak Senior Living beneath a smiling elderly couple posed beside a fake fireplace. "There," Marla said, smirking. "Better sooner than dead in our kitchen." I blinked at her, still seated at the dining table. The only light came from the small candle stuck into a sliver of cake I had cut myself that morning. No balloons, no cards, no calls. Just one candle. Just one breath away from extinction. "You can't even blow that out without wheezing," she added, gesturing to the candle's trembling flame. "So let's think ahead, shall we?" She wasn't done. "It's not like you're contributing anymore. You sit here, knitting blankets for no one, acting like your memories pay bills." She plucked the brochure from the cake, flicked the crumbs off its edge and dropped it back on the table, this time harder. "Besides, if you drop dead in here, who's going to clean that up?" "Not me." She turned on her heel, her heels clacking across the hardwood floor, her voice trailing behind like smoke from a scorched pot. "Happy birthday, I guess." The door slammed. The candle flickered but did not go out. I sat there for a full minute, unmoving. It was not just the brochure, or the frosting smeared across the face of a smiling stranger in a fake fireplace. It was the precision of it all, the way she timed the cruelty with my birthday, the way the silence after the slam felt like an answer. That was when I realized I was not part of their plans. I was a problem to be managed, a cluttered tab they were tired of balancing. I did not speak. I did not cry. I simply stared at the wax running down the side of the cake, pooling beside the smiling faces of retirees sipping tea in a fabricated sunroom. It was my 78th birthday. I wore the red cardigan Thomas gave me for our 25th anniversary. The house, the one we built room by room, board by board, memory by memory, now echoed with cold light and the ticking of a kitchen clock that no longer kept good time. I sat in the same place I had once fed Marla her first bite of cereal, the spot where Thomas had announced his retirement, the table where my granddaughter learned to write her name in flour on cookie dough. Now it was just me, a wilted cake, and the sense that I had overstayed my welcome in the very life I'd built. I picked up the brochure with trembling fingers, leaving a streak of pink frosting across the words, "Peaceful Transition." Inside were pastel illustrations of old women in rocking chairs, smiling beside schedule boards for bingo night and communal pudding, as if a life could be neatly scheduled into colored boxes, as if love could be replaced by square footage. I folded it once, then again, and placed it into my cardigan pocket. Not because I was going, but because I wasn't. Not quietly, not easily, and certainly not on her terms. Outside the window, the Michigan wind whipped dead leaves against the glass. The garden I once tended was overgrown, the swing set rusted, the bird feeder empty. I had watched this house empty out of meaning for years, slowly, like air seeping from a tire. And still, I stayed. I cooked. I cleaned. I was careful not to be too loud, too slow, too in the way, but now, on the one day I had left to claim, they gave me a funeral brochure disguised as a birthday gift. I stood, slowly, steadying my hands on the edge of the table. I scraped the cake into the trash. The plate made no sound. I lit another candle from the drawer, not for a wish, but for witness, and watched it flicker beside the ruined one. This was not greed. This was recognition. They thought I had no more use. But the thing about women like me, women who made homes from nothing and stitched dignity into every corner, is that we know how to reclaim what's ours. I walked back to my room, shut the door, and reached for my file cabinet, the one labeled Legacy. Inside, untouched, was a manila envelope. My plan B, the one I never thought I'd need. The one I had written after Thomas died, in a moment of private clarity. And now? Now I would finally use it. Because if they thought they could erase me with a brochure, they had no idea how much I had already prepared. And if they thought that garage out back was theirs, well, they were in for a surprise. There was a time they called me Mrs. Rant, sharp, respected, never late with a ledger or lenient with a lie. I taught accounting for 32 years. My students were engineers, small business owners, future CFOs. I taught them how to balance more than books. I taught them to respect value, especially the kind you cannot depreciate on paper. Then Thomas got sick. We had just celebrated his 65th birthday. He still laughed like a boy even after the X-ray. When they said stage 4, he just squeezed my hand and said, "Let's make this count." So I retired early. I cashed in my pension, we sold the cabin we'd been saving for, I filled out Medicaid paperwork and researched clinical trials and learned to blend kale into smoothies he hated. I was a wife, then a nurse, then a widow. After he passed, the silence was unbearable. The house was too clean, the routines too meaningless. I considered going back to work, but then Marla got engaged. She had dreams. A new house, open floor plan, walk-in pantry. The bank wouldn't approve them, too many student loans, too much potential and not enough proof. So I took what was left, the account Thomas never touched, the one labeled "for later," and gave it to her. Enough for a down payment and a cushion, I told her gently. This is for your future. Just promise me you'll build a home. She cried then, hugged me, said I'd always have a place. When I moved in 5 years ago, it was not with a suitcase, but with folded quilts, baking pans, framed photos of a life built slow and honest. My knees had started to go bad, and my hands no longer moved like they used to. Marla said, "It'll be easier this way. You can watch Emmy after school, and you'll have your own room." My room was a den. My job was unpaid. I cooked, I folded, I sewed the curtains. I taught Emmy how to make pot roast and write cursive. At first they called it helpful, then expected, then annoying. The first time I realized I was a burden was over spaghetti. I had made dinner, real sauce, simmered 6 hours and set the table. They came home, saw it, and Marla said, "Oh, you didn't have to cook. We were going to order Thai." Then they ate in front of the TV, left the spaghetti to cool. They stopped calling me to the table. The rocking chair I brought from my old house got pushed into the corner. One day I found my favorite quilt, the one with Thomas's college shirt sewn into diamonds, stuffed in the linen closet under old wrapping paper. Emmy stopped sitting on my lap, and Marla started leaving the mail unopened on the counter, except the ones addressed to me. Those she opened. "Just checking," she said. "Sometimes they're medical." I said nothing. Not because I agreed, but because fighting over envelopes seemed smaller than the hurt I could not name. They repainted the kitchen, took down the calendar I used, told me the fridge was too cluttered with my magnets. I moved them to the laundry room. The laundry room got a lock. "You're not a prisoner," Marla said when I asked for a spare key. "It's just boundaries." I began to shrink. I stopped baking, stopped humming, stopped suggesting walks or games or weekend movies, because everything I offered came with a sigh, a glance, a silence sharp enough to slice the crust from bread. I told myself, it's just a phase, they're busy, modern life is loud, but deep down I knew. I had become furniture, a fixture, a ghost in soft shoes and polite reminders. Still, I stayed. I stayed when they forgot my birthday the first time. I stayed when Marla rolled her eyes after I corrected Emmy's math. I stayed when they left me off the Christmas card list, because it's just immediate family this year. And I stayed when the pantry got a lock, too, because Thomas would have said, "You don't walk out just because it gets hard." But Thomas wasn't here anymore, and I was beginning to forget what home even felt like. So on the morning of my 78th birthday, when that brochure hit my cheek and the candle flickered alone, something inside me stopped asking to be seen. It began to calculate. Not vengeance, but value. I was folding a stack of dish towels when I heard laughter drift in from the garage. It was the kind of laughter that had too much air and not enough joy. The kind meant to perform, not connect. I peeked through the crack in the hallway door. Marla was live again. She had her phone propped up against a shelf of Christmas storage tubs, talking to her online followers with that bright-eyed tone that never quite reached her pupils. "Declutter December," she chirped, flipping her hair. "We're starting with the garage. No more junk, no more ghosts." She turned to Emmy, who giggled, then pointed her camera at the rocking chair I had once brought from my old house, the one Thomas built me our first anniversary. "Like this thing?" Marla said, tapping the armrest. It's sweet, I guess. But it's also in the way. Mom sits here and feeds the pigeons breadcrumbs like she's Snow White, only instead of bird singing, it's just feathers and poop. A few laughing emojis floated up from the live chat. One viewer typed, "At least the pigeons appreciate her." Marla smirked. "Yeah, well, someone has to." Then she paused, leaned in closer to the camera, and said, "You want to hear something dark?" She waited until the emoji count spiked. "If she dies before Christmas, we won't even have to clear this garage." "That's the bright side." Emmy gasped. "Mom," Marla shrugged. "What? It's not like she'll live forever. She's already wheezing like a broken accordion. I'm just being real." She laughed again. The cruel kind. The laugh of someone who confuses honesty with hostility. That was when she turned the camera to the wall, where a collage of old family photos hung. There I was, frozen in time, my wedding day. Thomas in uniform, me holding Emmy as a baby. Marla tapped the screen and added a filter that blurred my face in every image. "Just background noise now," she said. "Guest star turned ghost. We'll paint over this whole wall soon. It's not the vibe anymore." She clicked a sticker graphic onto the screen that read, "Decluttered and done." That was when I stepped back. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I walked slowly and deliberately back to my room, where the candle from my birthday morning still sat, melted to a stub. On my dresser I saw the brochure, Maple Oaks Nursing Home. Still creased and stained with frosting from where it had landed in my birthday cake, I picked it up. I read every word. Snow geese, spa services, a calendar of group bingo, the kind of curated comfort that pretends to be kindness. I opened my purse and slid the brochure inside. Not because I was accepting it, but because it reminded me what they thought I deserved. I would not be going to Maple Oaks. But I would respond, on my own terms, because that was the moment I realized they were not waiting for me to die. They had already started erasing me. So now, I would begin something new. Not revenge, not malice, a correction, because the house might still have my name on paper, but my presence had been priced out by convenience. And they had forgotten one thing. I was Mrs. Grant once. And I remembered how to audit. It was not always this way. There was a time when Marla looked at me with something close to admiration, a time when she still called me Mom instead of her, as in, "Can you tell her not to leave tea bags in the sink?" Or, "She still uses paper calendars, it's so weird." Back then, she used to bring me tea when I worked late at the college. I was a professor of accounting, one of 3 women in the department, and I earned the nickname Grant the Grit because I never let a spreadsheet slip. My students joked that I could smell a missing decimal from across the hallway. I had planned to retire at 70. I retired at 61 because Thomas asked me to. Cancer is not loud at first. It's a whisper that hides in a cough, in a shadow on an X-ray. By the time it shows up in full voice, it is already moving in. I sold our second car, canceled the kitchen remodel, and withdrew from my retirement fund to care for him at home. He died holding my hand, smiling, and when I whispered, "I'll keep my promise," I meant it. That was the promise, to protect the home, to keep it safe, for whatever came next. What came next was Marla. She had married young. Josh, a high school sweetheart, turned real estate agent turned entrepreneur, which in his case meant 10 ideas, 3 lawsuits, and 1 bankruptcy. By the time she was pregnant with Emmy, they were deep in debt, credit score tanked, foreclosure looming. No bank would touch them. So I did. I took my name, my one asset left, and placed it on the dotted line for their second chance. The house. A modest colonial with peeling shutters and a yard full of maple trees. I co-signed the mortgage, fronted the down payment from the last of Thomas's life insurance, and even covered the moving truck. When the papers came in, the realtor asked if I wanted to list myself as primary or joint owner. "I trust them," I said. "Family does not need fine print." At first it was warm. Marla would make tea in the mornings. Josh would offer to fix light bulbs. Emmy would climb onto my lap with cookie crumbs in her hair. It felt like something healing. When my knees began to ache and my hands stiffened, they offered the guest room downstairs. Said it would be easier than living alone. "You'll be close to us, and Emmy will love it." I thought it was an invitation of love, It was a lease without notice, because after the house deed was transferred fully to their names, a quiet decision, Marla said, made things simpler for taxes. The warmth cooled. Suddenly, I needed to knock before entering the kitchen. My rocking chair moved to the garage. It just didn't match the decor. The quilts I stitched, the ones Thomas used in his final months, disappeared from the linen closet. I found one in the dog's crate. My name on the mailbox vanished. Bills came addressed to resident. That afternoon, I took a Sharpie and wrote my name on a clothespin. I clipped it to the mailbox flap. The next morning, it was gone. I didn't replace it. Not because I surrendered, but because I began to understand. Some erasures are invitations, to rewrite, not to plead. One night, I walked into the living room to join dinner, only to find the table set for 3, with no chair left for me. Marla turned and said, "Oh, we didn't think you were hungry." That was the night I stopped waiting to be asked. I began eating toast in the laundry room. Once, I found my private mail opened. A medical bill, she had scrawled across it in red pen, "We are not paying this." When I confronted her, she shrugged. "Mama, you should be grateful we let you stay here. It's not like you're paying rent." I looked at her, my daughter, once so small in my arms, and realized something unbearable. She saw my presence as debt, not legacy, and I had co-signed my own erasure. That house had been my husband's dream, our late-night blueprint, the porch swing we planned, the window box for tulips. Every nail and panel held a memory I had tried to preserve, and I handed it away, thinking I was giving a gift. But a gift without boundaries becomes expectation. I never thought to ask for gratitude, but I never imagined I'd be treated as the burden I once carried for them. So I stopped asking. I started remembering, in silence, and one afternoon, while I dusted the piano no one played, I wrote in my planner, "They moved me in as a helper. They filed me under clutter, but I remember the contract, not the legal one, the one of the heart. And I would honor it, by not letting them tear it up without consequence, because trust is not a donation, it is an investment, and I was ready to balance the books. I had always believed in consequences. Not the fire-breathing kind, not revenge served on silver platters, but the kind that comes wrapped in silence, in paper trails, in signatures so sharp they cut deeper than words ever could. So, the day after Marla's birthday performance, brochure, cake, contempt, I opened the bottom drawer of my sewing cabinet and pulled out the one business card I had never thrown away, Maggie Cohen. She had been Thomas's attorney back when we were setting up the trust. Fierce, whip-smart, a woman who wore brooches like battle medals and never lost a case involving property. She retired the year he died, but her last words to me were, "If you ever need to protect something important, call me, no matter how long it's been." I called. "Lucille?" she answered, her voice still crisp as winter. I did not expect. "I need to redo my will," I said, "and I want to sell the house." There was silence. Then, "To your daughter?" I let the pause sit. "To someone who deserves it." I met her at a quiet cafe downtown, where the waiters still remembered my name from PTA meetings 20 years back. I told her everything. Not in tears, not in drama, just facts. How I had signed over the deed. How I was now eating meals in the laundry room, how my handmade quilts were being used to line dog crates, and how, on my 78th birthday, I was handed a brochure with bingo nights printed in pastel. She did not ask why I waited so long. She only said, "Let's do this right." The next day we drafted a new will, but not just any will, a blueprint of intent. First, the house. The colonial Thomas and I built into a home, the one with creaky floorboards and sun-dappled windows that held the laughter of decades. I could not bear to see it flipped or modernized by Marla's contractor husband with his obsession for gray floors and soulless countertops. So I gave it away to the Legacy Quilt Collective, a nonprofit that preserves stories through textile, memory, and oral history. A cultural sanctuary where older women pass down not just stitches, but strength. I had once donated a few patterns to them. They remembered me. They even offered to name the East Wing the Lucille Grant Room, a space to display my quilts, with plaques reading, "Donated by Mrs. Grant, Folk Artisan." Then, the items. Every quilt, every embroidered pillowcase, every table runner I stitched on sleepless nights after Thomas's diagnosis. They would no longer be clutter in a plastic bin. They would be history, curated, cared for, contextualized. Finally, the garage. Oh, I left that for Marla. The structure itself, but not the soil beneath it, not the fence around it, not the rights to plumbing or driveway use. Just 4 walls, a roof, and a property line so surgically defined it made Maggie raise her eyebrows. "She can't even access it," she said. "Exactly," I replied. She nodded. "Savage." "No," I said, sipping my tea. "Measured." We filed the paperwork quietly. I arranged the sale with the collective. They came to tour the house while Marla was at a conference, and I told them stories about each room. How Emmy learned to tie her shoes in the hallway. How Thomas planted that maple tree out front the day she was born. They listened, took notes, and promised to preserve every detail. I packed 1 suitcase. The rest I left behind, not out of haste, but symbolism. This was not me escaping. This was me returning ownership of my life, 1 stitch at a time. A week before Christmas, I walked to the post office and mailed the updated will via registered mail. 1 copy to the estate executor, 1 to Maggie, 1 to myself. The envelope to Marla contained just a card, a photo of the house, underneath a single sentence: "Thank you for the garage." I did not wait for her reaction, because by then I was already settled 2 blocks away, in a small apartment with east-facing windows and a bookshelf that smelled like cedar. I joined a quilting circle. I read my old journals. I baked blueberry muffins for the building manager's son. I became, quietly, stubbornly, Lucille again. No longer her, no longer a burden. And while Marla fumed and flailed, demanding explanations from a system she had taken for granted, the world kept spinning, and so did my sewing machine. Because the threads she'd tried to cut, I had rewoven into legacy. The sky was that milky gray Michigan called December, and Marla had decided to turn the will reading into content. She sat on a gray velvet chair in her living room, my old living room, dressed in cashmere and pearls, camera balanced just off screen. Her voice was syrupy, her smile controlled. "Mom always said this house had memories," she told the live stream. "She knew we built a life together. She lived here for 10 years, rent-free. Of course she left it to me. That's what mothers do." The chat filled with hearts and "so sweet" comments. She basked in it like sunlight. I watched from the other room, off camera, as the estate lawyer cleared his throat. We had agreed on this room. It was neutral, quiet, impersonal, a deliberate stage for a scene Marla had scripted without reading the last page. "I have been asked," the lawyer began, "to read the contents of the last will and testament of Lucille Irene Grant." Marla leaned forward slightly, dabbing invisible gloss on her lip. She wanted the moment to look soft, emotional, the kind of daughter who mourned with elegance. He continued, "To the organization known as Legacy Quilt Collective, I, Lucille Grant, hereby donate full ownership and custodial rights of my primary residence, including all furnishings, heirlooms, handmade works, and structural contents." The chat slowed. Marla blinked. "Wait. What?" The lawyer did not stop. "This transfer includes the east wing, all rooms marked domestic utility, and exterior property lines, as detailed in the appended floor plan. These assets shall be used to further the mission of preserving folk artistry, storytelling, and heritage, as intended." Marla sat back. Her mouth opened, but no words came. "To Marla Suzanne Grant," the lawyer said, and the room tensed with hope, like maybe there had been a mistake, a technicality. The pause was intentional. "You are hereby granted custodial rights to the detached garage formerly located at 1181 Orchard Lane. Usage is restricted to personnel storage purposes, accessible only via rear staff entrance. You have no claim to the land, plumbing, or driveway." A beat of silence, then a flicker, confusion, disbelief, rage. Her face cracked. "But this is a joke, right?" She laughed, but her voice hitched at the edges. "Mom always said we'd get the house." Everyone knew that. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. Mrs. Grant revised her documents on December 10th. "These changes are legal, binding, and filed with the state." The chat exploded. "What? Garage only? Is this satire?" Marla stood now flustered. She didn't even tell me. She never said anything about this. And that was my cue. I stepped forward. No fanfare, no applause, just me in my red cardigan, the one with a missing button and a faint tea stain, the one Thomas always said made me look like Christmas warmth in human form. Marla stared at me like I had risen from the floor. "Mom, what is this?" I took the mic. "You told me, Marla, that it was time to think ahead, that my place wasn't here, that I was a burden. You said it so sweetly, with a brochure in hand and contempt in your eyes." She opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. "You were right. I did think ahead. But I did not take the house with me. I left it right where it belonged, with the people who will never ask if it's too much trouble to remember someone's birthday." Someone in the chat wrote, "Go off, Queen." I looked directly into the camera. "You called my quilts junk. You called my presents clutter. You filtered my face from your footage as though I were some stain on your decor." I pulled a small notebook from my pocket, the one I always kept in my knitting bag. I wrote down everything you said, not out of pettiness, but clarity. Because when the time came to choose who would inherit my life's work, I needed to be sure they would never treat a story as garbage. Marla was frozen. Her pearl necklace sat heavy on her throat. I turned back to the lawyer. "Thank you," I said. "And now if you'll excuse me, I promised the museum staff I'd teach them the memory border stitch this afternoon." I walked out. The candle in the hallway flickered. Someone held the door for me, Emmy, my granddaughter. She had not said much since she arrived, but when we passed each other, she squeezed my hand. "They never saw you," she whispered. But I did. And in that moment, I felt lighter than I had in years, because the house was no longer just brick and wood, it was a story. And I had made sure it would be told without edits, without shame, and without apology. The grand opening of the Legacy Quilt Collective was not meant to be extravagant. We planned it as a quiet unveiling, a gentle celebration of memory, stitched, not shouted. But stories have a way of finding light. The morning of the ribbon cutting, the parking lot was full. A line curled around the block. Reporters, students, families, and old friends who still remembered how I made cider donuts every October. Someone held a handmade sign, "Memory is not clutter." Inside, the gallery glowed. They had arranged the quilts just the way I imagined, not by color or pattern, but by story. Each piece had a small brass plaque, "Lucille Grant, Michigan, 1973, or Lucille Grant, in memory of Thomas, 1981. Even the oldest blanket, the one Marla called Rags for Pigeons, was displayed under a warm spotlight, its edges gently frayed but dignified. At the center wall, a carved wooden plaque read, "Lucille Grant, Keeper of Memory." Someone had strung fairy lights across the beams. I had not asked for that. It made the whole room feel like a porch on a summer night, safe, soft, waiting for stories. The press had their angle, the woman who avenged her life in quilts. Elder outsmarts ingrates, leaves legacy in fabric, not flesh. I did not mind the flair. If it made people listen longer, remember harder, so be it. But what I remember most is the knock that afternoon. She came quietly. Maya, my granddaughter. She stood in the entrance holding a brown paper bag. Her hair was tied up in a messy bun, her coat oversized. She looked nothing like the filtered girl from Marla's videos. Just herself. There was a softness to her I had not seen since she was 6, sitting at my kitchen counter, asking why sugar made cookies brown. Now she sat with hands unsure, eyes searching for permission, not to be forgiven, but to begin. That is why I chose her, because legacy requires not perfection, but presence. "I brought you cinnamon cookies," she said, eyes down. I did not speak at first, not because I was angry, but because my heart swelled in a way I had not expected. "I used the recipe you wrote on the back of that old library card," she added. I nodded and stepped aside. She came in. No cameras, no performance. We sat in the back of the textile library, a small room I had filled with fabric scraps, recipe cards, handwritten letters, and stories that never made it into photo albums. She helped me organize spools of thread and label swatches. Around us, women's laughter echoed from the next room. Visitors took photos with the quilts. A small child asked who Mrs. Grant was, and someone pointed toward the textile room. I waved from the doorway. He waved back. Maya placed her hand on the table. "I'm sorry," she said. "I knew what Mom was doing. I didn't stop her. I was afraid she'd cut me off. And now? I don't care." I looked at her, and for the first time I saw the same flicker Thomas once had when he left his teaching post to spend his final days in the garden. That gentle defiance, that choosing of soul over convenience. "You're here now," I said simply. We worked until the sky dimmed. She stayed behind when others left. Later that week, I met with the board. I changed my will again. All rights to my designs, my royalties from the center's gift shop, the endowment I had secretly grown through years of modest investments, all of it would go to Maya, with one condition, that she never turn it into a brand, a chain, or a content channel, that she keep it as it was, slow, careful, stitched by hand. The name of the grant would remain, the Lucille Grant Fund for Memory and Craft. But the custodian would be Maya, not Marla. Marla never came to the center. I do not know if she ever read the newspaper headlines or saw the photos. I suspect she did, but pride builds thick walls. She may never speak to me again. And I am at peace with that, because legacy is not owed by blood. It is earned by care, and memory, I have learned, is not a passive thing. It is an active choosing, again and again, to hold what matters and let go of what bruises. When the lights dim each evening and the last visitor steps out into the cold, I walk through the gallery once more. I touch the edge of each quilt. I whisper names. I remember. And now someone younger remembers too. Not because she must, but because she chooses to. Marla's fall was not dramatic, not at first. It was subtle, like fabric slowly unraveling. She tried to spin the story, of course. In her next live stream, she wore a tailored beige coat and stood outside what was once our home. "We're downsizing," she told her followers, her voice bright and fake. "Mom wanted to travel. It's bittersweet." But the internet, for once, remembered the truth. The clip of her slapping a brochure into my cake, now affectionately called the frosting slap, had gone viral. The footage of her joking about garage space if I died before Christmas resurfaced. Comment sections turned. Sponsors backed out. Even the coffee brand she used to promote issued a statement, "We stand with our elders." She did not lose everything in a day. But in the weeks that followed, she lost enough. The house was gone, the sponsorships, the illusion. And, I think, whatever piece of Maya still looked at her with belief. As for me, I moved into a small apartment 2 blocks from the Legacy Quilt Collective. It had a tiny balcony just wide enough for a rocking chair and a pot of marigolds. The first morning I hung a wind chime Thomas had once carved from bent spoons. It sang a little every time I opened the window. People expected me to live like a recluse, I think, to mourn what I had given away. But I did not give anything away. I returned it to the world. Each Wednesday I taught a class at the center. We called it Threading Memory. A dozen women in their 60s, 70s, and beyond sat in a circle, hands busy, laughter unforced. Some were widows, some had been left behind, all of them had stitches to offer. We worked on a collective quilt, no theme, just stories. One square showed a white chicken in a broom. "That was the day I threw his dinner out the window," one woman chuckled. Another had blue patches stitched with yellow lightning. "I was divorced in a thunderstorm," she said. "Even pain can be sewn into beauty." Maya came often, not out of guilt, but rhythm. She would help reorganize fabric bins, run workshops for kids, or take Polaroids for the archive wall. She stopped posting about it online. I think she realized not everything sacred needs an audience. One afternoon, as we folded finished quilts into cedar-lined drawers, she looked at me. "Grandma," she said softly, "do you regret it?" Her voice had no judgment, only curiosity, a desire to understand, not justify. I pressed a hem flat and did not rush to answer. Outside, the wind stirred the branches. Across the street, a toddler pointed at our center's banner and yelled, "Grandma Place!" I smiled. "I only regret," I said slowly, "that I did not do it sooner." Maya laughed, not unkindly. She hugged me, resting her head briefly on my shoulder, and I thought, this is enough. Not just her hug, but her question, her wanting to know, to learn from. That was more legacy than property ever gave. They called me a burden. They said I took up space, wasted oxygen, cluttered the living room with sentiment and time. So I turned that burden into a legacy, and I left them what they wanted most: the garage. Empty, cold, unloved. You see, a house is not brick. It is not square footage or marble counters or driveway size. A house is the memory of the first dinner after grief, the sound of slippers at midnight, the way light lands on a photograph, the hum of someone still breathing in the room next to yours. I gave them none of that, because they gave none of that to me, and so I kept the house. Not the walls, the meaning, the soul, and they got what they valued most: space. __. If this story found its way to a quiet part of your heart, then you know why I told it, because sometimes the loudest revenge is silence, a locked door, a will rewritten in peace. Because dignity does not demand a seat at the table, it builds a new one. If you've ever been forgotten, underestimated, or told your love was a burden, then know this: you are not alone, and your story matters. I'm Lucille Grant, and I finally took my name back. And if you want more true stories like mine, of quiet strength, earned clarity, and the kind of endings only grandmothers know how to write, subscribe to Grandma True Stories. I've got more to tell, and trust me, they only get better.